On her first day, she looked at the Mafia boss pants and asked, "Is that real or is it a gun?" Nomi Damiani was only supposed to be a temporary secretary, late from the subway, coffee-stained, and desperate to keep a job that could pay her mother's medical bills. Then she walked into Severo Marchetti office with a cup of espresso, held together by superglue, and made the worst mistake imaginable. Not have gone, and her mouth betrayed her before her survival instinct could stop it. Severo heard every word. Instead of firing her, he crossed the room, bent close to her ear, and asked why she was afraid of what was in his pants. Nomi should have run. Instead, she wondered why she wasn't afraid at all. Nomi Damiani thought a temporary secretary job would be simple. Answer phones, carry coffee, survive 1 month, use the paycheck to keep her mother's medical bills from swallowing them whole. She did not expect the Marchetti building to feel less like an office and more like a place where secrets came to be buried. No one laughed. Guards spoke in low code. Employees moved quietly, as if noise itself could get them punished. Even the air seemed trained to obey the man behind the double doors. On her first morning, 12 minutes trapped in a stalled subway car made her late, sweaty, and desperate. By noon, she would break a cup, glue it back together, and ask her new boss the worst question of her life. And when CEO Marchetti finally looked up from his desk, Nomi would understand that some mistakes do not end when the words leave your mouth. They begin there. When the train doors finally opened, Nomi ran out with her hair half loose and coffee spreading across the front of her blouse. She hurried 6 blocks in heels toward the spotless Marchetti Tower, while strangers glanced at her like she was already falling apart. The building rose above the street, in marble and cold glass, calm in a way that made her feel even messier. At reception, the woman checked Nomi's name twice, then looked at her surname as if Damiani were not a family name, but a warning she had heard before. 22nd floor, the receptionist said, sliding over a visitor badge without smiling. The elevator climbed too slowly. Nomi wiped at the coffee stain, failed, and stepped out into a silence so complete that even the phone seemed afraid to ring. No one looked relaxed. Nomi clutched her bag, lifted her chin, and tried to look like someone who belonged there. Raphael Key was waiting for her beside a glass wall. He was in his 50s, sharply dressed, and carried the expression of a man who had stopped expecting competence from anyone. He looked at his watch before he looked at her face. "You are late." Nomi opened her mouth to explain the subway, then shut it again. Raphael did not seem like a man interested in reasons. He led her to the antechamber outside the inner office and gave the rules in a voice as dry as paper. Be punctual, be discreet. Never enter the inner office unless called. Never interrupt a meeting. Never transfer repeated calls. Never ask about the men who came and went. And never, under any circumstances, open anonymous envelopes. Anonymous envelopes, Nomi asked before she could stop herself. Raphael stopped walking. Especially those. He stared at her long enough for the warning to settle. After that, Nomi decided silence might be safer than curiosity. A new desk came with a chair too expensive for a temporary secretary, and a black and white photograph of a foggy harbor that looked strangely out of place. Nomi sat down carefully, as if the furniture might accuse her of fraud. The office was quiet enough to make every small movement feel rude. 4 men entered the inner office without greeting anyone. None of them smiled. One had eyes so flat Nomi looked away before he noticed her staring. Another came out 10 minutes later with a bandage wrapped around his hand, red already soaking through the gauze. He hid it quickly beneath his sleeve. No one reacted. No one asked what had happened. A woman at the next desk kept typing without lifting her head. Nomi opened her drawer, found a box of paper clips, and began sorting them by color just to keep her hands from shaking. In ordinary offices, people hid gossip. Here, they hid fear. By late morning, Nomi had built 3 crooked paperclip towers and learned one thing on this floor. Silence was not absence. It was control. Phones chimed once and died. Shoes moved over carpet without sound. People did not walk past the double doors. They approached, waited, and left only when allowed. Then just before noon, those doors opened. CEO Marchetti stepped out. The room changed before he said a word. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, revealing black tattoos over strong, corded arms. Saints, thorns, script. Nomi did not understand. His hair was slicked back, his jaw sharp, his dark eyes unreadable. He moved like a man who had never needed to hurry because the world came to him. Conversations stopped, backs straightened. Even Raphael seemed to become more careful. Nomi suddenly became painfully aware of the coffee stain drying on her blouse. Seo did not ask her name. He did not welcome her. He did not even glance at the visitor badge clipped crookedly to her jacket. He only looked at the stain, then at her face and said, "Double espresso. Black cup. Top shelf." Then he turned back into his office, leaving the door to close with a soft click. In the pantry, Nomi dragged a stool beneath the cabinet and stretched for the cup. The top shelf was too high, because apparently even the kitchenware in this building had class barriers. Her fingers brushed porcelain, slipped, and knocked one cup loose. It hit the floor and shattered. She grabbed at the air, bumped the shelf, and sent a second cup crashing down. For one terrible second, she simply stood there, surrounded by broken black ceramic and the sound of her own breathing, imagining Raphael's face, Sio's eyes, and unemployment arriving before lunch. Panic made her practical in the worst possible way. Amy dug through her purse and found a tiny tube of superglue she had bought to fix the strap of her mother's reading glasses. "This is fine," she whispered, though nothing was fine. With trembling hands, she chose the least damaged cup and glued the handle back on, holding it in place as if she were saving a life. Somehow, it stayed. Minutes later, she carried the double espresso into COS office in a cup held together by glue, fear, and one bad decision. He was bent over his desk, his broad frame outlined by the Manhattan skyline. Papers lay in perfect stacks. A locked drawer stood slightly open. Inside, she glimpsed the edge of an old photograph before he pushed it shut with 2 fingers. More than the city view, more than the tattoos, more than the danger she already felt but could not name. Nomi set the cup beside his tattooed hand and prepared to escape. Then her eyes betrayed her. They drifted from the papers to the sharp line of his trousers and landed exactly where they should not have. Heat rushed up her neck. She looked away too fast, which only made it worse. She reached the door, one hand already on the handle, when her mouth decided to ruin her life. "Is that real?" she muttered. "Or is that a gun?" The office went still. CO stopped turning the page. Slowly he set the papers down. Nomi closed her eyes for half a second, hoping the floor might open. It did not. When she looked again, he was already walking toward her. He crossed the room without raising his voice, which somehow made him more frightening. Nomi stepped back, until the door pressed cold against her shoulder blades. There was nowhere left to go. CO leaned down until his mouth was near her ear. "Why?" he asked softly. "Are you afraid of what is in my pants?" Her brain emptied. Every clever word she had ever known vanished. She stared at his tie, then his throat, then anywhere but his face. A faint trace of amusement touched his eyes, but it was controlled, cold, and far too aware of the power he had over the room. He let the silence stretch until Nomi felt it like heat under her skin. Then he stepped back, picked up the repaired cup, took one sip, and paused. Nomi held her breath, praying the handle would not fall off in his hand. It held. CO set the cup down and said, "Weak." Somehow, that was worse than being fired. Nomi backed out of the office with as much dignity as a woman could have, after asking her new boss about his trousers. The moment the door closed, Nomi leaned against it and whispered, "Amazing. Perfect. First day." Her memory replayed the words in full, cruel detail. "Is that real or is that a gun?" She pressed both hands over her face. This job was supposed to be temporary. The chair was comfortable. The pay was absurdly generous. The health benefits might finally cover the treatments her mother kept pretending she did not need. Nomi had endured rude bosses before. She had endured exhaustion, debt, and subway delays. But Seo Marchetti was different. He did not simply intimidate people. He changed how they breathed around him. By the end of the day, Raphael placed a stack of documents on her desk and said, "Mr. Marchetti expects discretion." Nomi looked toward the double doors. About the work, Raphael's eyes did not move. About everything. That was when she understood. The job description had been a lie. The next morning, Nomi arrived 11 minutes early, wearing a clean blouse and the expression of someone determined to become invisible. The plan lasted until 9:12, when the phone rang. She answered in the polished voice she had practiced all night. "Marchetti Holdings, how may I direct your call?" The receiver slipped from her hand, bounced off the desk, and dropped to the carpet. She scrambled under the desk after it, and hit her head on the drawer. "I'm so sorry," she said into the phone, breathless. The caller had already hung up. Raphael passed behind her without slowing. "Try not to lose the phone. It is attached." From inside the double doors, she thought she heard the faintest sound of a laugh. It was gone so quickly she could not prove it. Still, it unsettled her. Seo Marchetti, almost laughing at her, was somehow more dangerous than Seo Marchetti threatening her. It meant he was paying attention. The first week became a series of tests Nomi was never told she was taking. Seo gave her documents to translate, schedules to rearrange, calls to screen, and files to organize in systems that seemed designed by someone who hated other humans. Her Italian was good enough for class, not good enough for contracts written like traps. Seo never corrected her mistakes. He only scanned the pages, paused on the errors, and moved on. That silence made her want to confess crimes she had not committed. On the second day, while searching old files, a photograph slipped from a folder, two barefoot boys in the grass, one holding the other's hand in front of a large house. On the back someone had written, LNS Summer. The older boy stood slightly in front of the younger one, as if shielding him from something outside the frame. The younger boy's face was serious in a way no child's should have been. Nomi should have put the photograph back immediately. Instead, she stared too long. There was something familiar in the younger boy's mouth, in the heavy set of his eyes, in the way he seemed prepared for disappointment before he was old enough to name it. She looked toward COS closed office door, then down at the image again. Before she could think better of it, she tucked the photo between the pages of her notebook. By the third day, Tommaso appeared outside Seo's door. He was tall, broad, silent, and built like a warning. Nomi looked at him, then at the locked doors. So, she said nervously, are we importing plutonium? Tommaso did not blink. His stillness only made her worse. I'm kidding. In which case I probably need a different tax form. His eyes moved to her at last. You talk too much. For once, she had no comeback. The smallest shift passed through Tommaso's shoulders, almost like amusement. And Nomi decided that counted as progress. Later that afternoon, the intercom buzzed once, entered COS office, and found him waiting beside her chair with a document. Read the highlighted clause. He could have emailed it. Instead, he stood close enough for his tattooed arm to hover beside hers. The scent of cedar, ink, and expensive cologne filled the narrow space between them. CO pointed at the paragraph, his sleeve brushing her arm. The contact was brief, but it shot through her focus like static. Nomi stared at the page and absorbed nothing. Miss Damiani, he said. Are you reading? I'm trying, she answered. But you were standing inside my oxygen. His eyes lifted from the document. Outside the glass, Tommaso turned slightly toward the wall. Nomi swallowed. There's a thing called personal space, you know. CO studied her for a long second. And yet, CO said, you keep entering mine without knocking. She had no answer to that, because unfortunately he was right. By the end of the week, Nomi understood that boundaries in CO's world were not announced. They were tested, pressed, and sometimes ignored entirely. 2 days later, Raphael appeared at her desk with car keys and an errand that sounded simple until he said the destination, Bensonhurst. Deliver the envelope. Wait in the car unless told otherwise. The black sedan waiting downstairs had tinted windows and a driver who did not introduce himself. Nomi sat in the back with the envelope on her lap, watching Midtown fade into Brooklyn. No one explained what was inside. No one answered when she asked. When she tried to hold it up to the light, Raphael took it from her hand and said, do not develop habits that shorten your life. He did not sound like he was joking. They stopped behind a modest Italian restaurant called Leander S. From the street, it looked warm and harmless. Red awning, checked curtains, a chalkboard menu advertising homemade gnocchi. From the alley, it looked different. Reinforced glass, 2 locks on the kitchen door, a camera angled at the back entrance. 3 men rose from their chairs. The instant Raphael entered through the back door, the movement was too synchronized to be hospitality. Leander S. smelled like tomato sauce, basil, and fresh bread, but beneath the warmth were details that did not belong. Men watched exits instead of customers. A waiter carried a tray with one hand and kept the other near his waistband. Raphael disappeared into a private room. Amy waited near the back hallway, holding her bag too tightly. When he returned, she asked, who is Leander? Raphael adjusted his cuff. Someone important. 'Tis me the phone servant. To Mr. Marchetti. That was all he gave her. Outside, 2 men stood beside the sedan. They stopped talking the moment Nomi appeared. One smiled without warmth. The other looked at her like he was deciding how much trouble she might be worth. The man nearest the car had a scar down his neck and eyes that made Nomi's stomach tighten. The other kept both hands in his coat pockets. The fabric pulled tight around something heavy. Nomi froze. Then Tommaso stepped into view, placing himself between her and the men without a word. It was not dramatic. It was precise, practiced, and final. The scarred man's smile vanished. Raphael opened the car door as if nothing had happened. Get in, Miss Damiani. On the ride back, Nomi stared through the tinted window and tried to convince herself she had imagined the danger. But by Friday evening, when CO passed her desk and paused at the elevator, she knew imagination had nothing to do with it. CO turned only his head. You survived your first week. It was not praise. It was an assessment. Nomi looked up from her keyboard. You sound disappointed. For the first time, something almost moved at the corner of his mouth. Not disappointed. Shocked. Then, the elevator doors opened behind him. Curious. Then he stepped inside and disappeared. Nomi replayed that single word all the way home. On the subway, her friend Elise called and demanded details. Is he terrifying hot or just lawsuit hot? Elise. That means both. Nomi looked down at her bag, where the photo of the 2 boys still rested inside her notebook. I think something is very wrong there, she said. Elise went quiet, then leave. Nomi stared at the dark window, where her own reflection looked tired and guilty. I can see. The money mattered. Her mother's prescriptions mattered. Rent mattered. And now, so did the photograph. As the train rattled through the tunnel, Nomi saw Bensonhurst again, the locked doors, the men outside. Tommaso, stepping in front of her like a shield. Elise listened, then said what Nomi had not wanted to say. That restaurant sounds like a money-laundering front. Nomi laughed because fear had nowhere else to go. But the photograph in her notebook felt heavier by the second. Initial that might have stood for Leander. One face that, if she looked too long, reminded her of Sio before the world had carved all softness out of him. At home, her mother's apartment should have felt like refuge. It smelled of rosemary cream, old books, and the bitter tea her mother drank for pain. Medication bottles stood in careful rows beside the sink. Nomi helped her mother to bed, lied about the stain on her blouse, and promised the new job was boring. Her mother smiled, because she wanted to believe her. Later, alone in her room, Nomi opened her notebook and studied the old photograph again. LNS, summer. The older boy's hand was wrapped firmly around the younger one's. Nomi thought of Sios' locked drawer, his steady gaze, his silence when people obeyed him. She should have returned the photo. Instead, she slid it under her pillow like a secret she already knew would cost her. The following week, Raphael announced her promotion, as if reading a sentence in court. Mr. Marchetti requires you closer to his office, closer than outside the door, inside when needed. Her photographic memory had caught Sios' attention. That was the official reason. The unofficial reason, Nomi suspected, had more to do with the way he watched her when he thought she was too busy to notice. Documents to her directly, pausing a second too long before letting go. He lowered his voice when he said her name. Sio stood near enough that she could feel the heat of him, and far enough that she could not accuse him of anything. It was infuriating. Worse, it worked. One afternoon, he leaned over her desk to point out a clause in a contract. His tattooed forearm was inches from her face. Nomi saw St. Rita inked there, framed by roses and thorns. Enough Catholic symbolism to recognize the patron saint of hopeless causes. That's an interesting choice, she said before she could stop herself. Sio's finger stilled on the page. For a man like me. Nomi looked up. I was going to say for a man who looks like never waited patiently for divine intervention. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Sio turned his head slowly, dark eyes fixed on hers. For 3 heartbeats, she thought she had finally gone too far. Then his jaw shifted. Not anger, restraint. Nomi saw the rarest thing in that office. He was trying not to smile. The almost smile disappeared so quickly. She wondered if she had imagined it. Sio straightened, took the contract, and returned to his office without another word. Nomi sat frozen, pulse racing. Provoking him was dangerous. Unfortunately, it was also becoming too easy. By the 3rd day without a lunch break, hunger stripped away her common sense. She marched into his office without knocking. Sio looked up. Miss Damiani, need 20 minutes, a chair, and food that is not my own dignity. Her voice carried into the antechamber. The office went silent. Even the phones seemed to hold their breath. Tommaso, standing near the door, turned slightly away, but not fast enough to hide the beginning of a smile. Sio set down his pen. You entered without permission. Yes, Nomi said, to complain about lunch, to request basic human maintenance. He studied her as if she were a problem he had not decided whether to solve or remove. Nomi held his gaze, though her knees were trembling. At last, Sio leaned back. 20 minutes. She blinked. Really? Do not make me regret it. Nomi walked out with her head high and her stomach growling, feeling as if she had won a war no one else had seen. Next morning, a white porcelain plate waited on her desk beside a linen napkin. Gnocchi al pesto from Leander's. No note, no explanation. Tommaso stood in the hall, suddenly very interested in the wall. Nomi looked at the plate, then at him. Did this come from the lunch fairy? Tommaso said, eat before it gets cold. That was the closest thing to an answer she received. A few days later, Raphael told her to accompany Sio to Bensonhurst. This time, she rode with Sio himself. In the back of the black sedan, Nomi slid as far away as the leather seat allowed. It did not help. In that small space, 16 inches felt almost intimate. For 10 minutes, Manhattan traffic moved around them, while silence thickened inside the car. Nomi kept her eyes on the window. Sio worked on his tablet, and the driver braked hard. She lurched forward. Sio's hand shot out by instinct, stopping just short of her waist. He pulled it back at once, as if touching her would admit too much. Desperate to break the tension, Nomi said, Your driver handles traffic like we being chased. Sio did not look up. Maybe we are. Her head turned. He finally set the tablet aside. Why is a law student answering my phones? The question landed too directly. Nomi looked at her hands. Because law school does pay hospital bills. Co waited, and the quiet pulled the rest out of her. Her mother's arthritis had become severe. Depression had followed. Prescriptions, appointments, rent, tuition. Everything had stacked up until Nomi could barely breathe. So I took the job, she said. Even if your office feels like a place where witnesses disappear. Co's eyes stayed on her face. He did not offer sympathy, which she appreciated more than she expected. You are terrible at pretending, he said. So are you, she answered. His hand rested on the leather seat between them, close enough that she felt the warmth from his fingers. Neither of them moved away. Brooklyn Bridge rose ahead, gray and massive, carrying them toward another locked door. Nomi wanted to ask about Leander. She wanted to ask about the boys in the photograph. Instead, she swallowed both questions. At Leander's, Co disappeared into the private room while Nomi waited in the hall. For 15 minutes, she heard low voices, calm enough to be business. Then the door stayed open by a narrow crack, and Co's voice changed. It went flat, stripped of warmth. I told him there would be a consequence, he said. And to believe me. Now he does. No one answered. That silence and frightened Nomi more than shouting would have. When Co came out, he looked untouched, immaculate, almost bored. Then she saw it. A small dark red mark on the cuff of his white shirt. Not much, just enough. Co caught her looking and fastened the cuff slowly, hiding the stain without a word. Outside, Nomi's heel caught the curb. Before she could hit the asphalt, Co's hand closed around her arm. His grip was firm, controlled, and shockingly warm through the sleeve of her blazer. For 1 second, he held her there. His thumb rested against the inside of her arm, right where her pulse was racing. Watch where you step, he said. I was watching your shirt. His eyes flicked to hers. For a heartbeat, neither of them pretended not to know what she meant. Then he let go and walked to the car. The ride back to Manhattan was silent, but it was no longer empty. The space between them seemed full of things neither of them had permission to say. Days later, during the quiet stretch of an afternoon shift, Nomi brought him coffee. This time, she had practiced. Rich crema. Correct cup. Co lifted it, drank, and set it down. Acceptable. Nomi stared at him. That may be the warmest thing you've ever said to me. He looked back at his papers. Do not get used to it. As she turned to leave, she muttered, You re-welcome, Your Majesty. She knew. He heard her. He knew she knew. The corner of his mouth moved once, then vanished. After that, the 5:30 coffee became a ritual. She made it. He judged it. She insulted him under her breath. He pretended not to hear. It was not friendship, not exactly, but it gave her a narrow space where she could still feel like herself. Then an unmarked black box arrived by courier. Inside lay a floor-length black dress. Heavy, elegant, and expensive enough to make Nomi afraid to touch it. No card, no request, just a command made of fabric. Tommaso appeared soon after. Mr. Marchetti requests your presence at a black-tie gala at Cipriani Wall Street. Nomi lifted the dress. High-necked, restrained, beautiful. Does Mr. Marchetti know assistants are not accessories? Tommaso's mouth twitched. He knows many things. Does he also know I have rent? Your rent is not his concern tonight. Hours later, the car stopped outside Cipriani Wall Street. Stone columns rose above her, and the high ceilings inside made every guest look smaller than they wanted to admit. Only that morning, Nomi had been shoved against a subway pole by a man eating an onion bagel. Now waiters in white gloves moved around her with champagne, and Co stood beside her in a black suit that made everyone's eyes lower as he passed. The room glittered with diamonds, gold watches, and smiles that never reached anyone's eyes. The gala was supposed to be for charity, but Nomi understood within minutes that charity was only the decoration. The real event was power. Men approached Co carefully, voices lowering before they spoke. Women watched him from behind champagne glasses. Older men clasped his hand with too much respect and not enough ease. No one treated him like a guest. They treated him like a verdict that had not yet been delivered. Co moved through it all with polished calm. Nomi stayed half a step behind him, aware of his hand near her back, not touching yet, but close enough to remind everyone she had arrived with him. When Co left to speak with a group of older men, Nomi escaped to the appetizer table and pretended to understand the difference between 3 kinds of caviar. That was when Gideon Salvarezza approached. He was handsome in a way that looked professionally maintained. Perfect hair, perfect suit, perfect smile, watch flashing at his wrist. Nothing about him felt accidental. Co Marchetti does not bring assistants to these dinners, he said. Nomi forced a polite smile. He knows how to alphabetize. Gideon laughed softly and offered his hand. She took it because refusing would have caused a scene. His grip lingered 1 second too long. Nomi Damiani, he repeated as if tasting the name. Before Gideon could say more, Sio appeared beside her. His hand settled at the base of her spine, firm and unmistakable. It was not comfort. It was a warning. Nomi went still under the weight of it. Gideon's eyes dropped to Sio's hand and his smile sharpened. I was only introducing myself. Sio's voice was calm. You have. The words were simple. The threat underneath them was not. Gideon released her hand and stepped back. Enjoy the evening, Miss Damiani. When he left, Sio's hand remained. Nomi glanced up at him. You could have used words. I did. Barely. Enough. She hated that he was right. She hated more that part of her felt safer with his hand there. For the rest of dinner, Sio's touch appeared and disappeared like a silent claim. At her back as they walked, on her chair as he stood, near her shoulder when men leaned too close. Nomi felt protected and furious in equal measure. Needing air, she excused herself to the restroom. Inside, 2 women were whispering by the sinks. That's Marchetti's new girl, one said. I heard the last one vanished in 3 months. The other laughed. Vanished how? Ran away, or Marchetti away. Nomi locked herself in a stall and pressed both hands against the door. The dress suddenly felt less like a gift, and more like a label she had never agreed to wear. When she returned to the table, her hands were cold and her smile felt borrowed, and realized she was holding the dessert fork and fish knife. Carefully she switched them, hoping no one noticed. Sio leaned closer. Wrong fork. Where I come from, people eat with their hands. His mouth twitched. Efficient. The small exchange steadied her, more than the champagne ever could. Later, when they left, Sio opened the car door for her, his hand hovering but not touching. Then his phone rang. His face changed before he answered. The warmth vanished. His voice dropped into fast, sharp Italian, full of pauses that sounded like orders and names that sounded like threats. Nomi sat beside him as the car moved through the city, watching the man from the gala disappear into something harder. The almost smile, the dry humor, the hand at her back, all of it vanished beneath the cold authority of a commander. When he ended the call, he did not explain. He only stared through the dark window, already somewhere else. Nomi saw a black car parked across from her mother's building. It was still there after 10 minutes. After 20, her stomach dropped. The next morning, Raphael called it protection. Nomi called it what it felt like, surveillance. Nomi confronted Sio that evening, ignoring Raphael's warning not to enter. Sio was alone in his office, tie loosened, sleeves rolled, the city burning gold behind him. There's a car outside my mother's building. I know, that is not an answer. It is protection. Protection from what? He said nothing. Nomi stepped closer. My mother is sick. She scares easily. If she sees strange men watching the apartment, she won't sleep for a week. Something moved in his expression, quick and buried. Your proximity to me has been noticed. I am your temp secretary. Not anymore. The words hit harder than they should have. Then tell me what I am. Sio looked away. That frightened her, more than any answer. He ordered the men to stay. He did not explain the threat, Gideon's interest, or why her last name had made people stare. That night, Nomi stopped waiting for answers. She searched the Marchetti name until the screen blurred, sealed investigations, shipping, routes, old arrests without convictions, and photos of Vittorio Marchetti, with men who looked allergic to courtrooms. Then she searched Leander S. A grainy article appeared from 16 years earlier. Behind the crowd at the restaurant opening stood a man with a familiar half-smile. Nomi zoomed in until the pixels broke. Aldo Damiani, her father. The man her mother said had died suddenly when Nomi was 8. He was standing in Sio's world, alive enough to cast a shadow. Nomi did not close the laptop. She opened 3 more tabs, found an old corporate registry, then a newspaper archive from Queens. Aldo's death notice was short, too short, with no hospital listed and no cause named. A second article mentioned a missing dock worker who had vanished the same week. The name meant nothing to her, but the port did. Marchetti freight routes had been active there that year. In folder, and emailed it to herself under a fake subject line, civil procedure notes. The pieces around Sio sharpened all at once. The guards, the restaurant, the coded calls, the stain on his cuff, the car outside her mother's building. Ignorance had been comfortable. Now it was gone. The next evening, fear became footsteps. Nomi was walking home from the train when someone behind her matched her pace. She turned left. The footsteps followed. She quickened. So did they. Before she could run, Tommaso stepped out from the corner and placed himself between her and the shadow behind her. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The figure retreated into the dark. Car, Tommaso said. Now Nomi wanted to argue. Instead, she got in. Her fear had become too real for pride. The car took her to the Marchetti estate on Staten Island, a dark stone mansion built above Tot Hill. The gates opened slowly. Nomi stared at the house and understood how easily a fortress could become a prison. Sio had sent another gown for dinner. Nomi left it in the box and wore her own green dress, simple, soft, and stubbornly hers. Moved over her with quiet surprise. He understood the refusal. He did not challenge it. Lucrezia Marchetti greeted her first. Warm smile, firm hands, and eyes that measured everything. Vittorio sat at the head of the table in a wheelchair, paralyzed but far from powerless. His silence anchored the room. Niamh watched with bright curiosity. Niccolo had not yet arrived. Nomi felt every gaze settle on her dress, her posture, her name. She had entered as Sio's guest. She was being examined like evidence. Vittorio's eyes were pale, sharp, and patient. When he spoke, the room listened. Damiani, he said casually. That is an old name. Nomi's fingers tightened around her glass. Sio saw it at once. Before Vittorio could continue, Sio reached for the wine. The Barolo is better tonight. It was a small interruption, almost polite, but it moved the room away from her with surgical precision. Nomi looked at him, shaken by how quickly he had protected her from a question he clearly understood. Niamh swept in like sunlight through a locked room. Is she the one who asked if your pants were a gun? Nomi nearly choked. Sio closed his eyes for 1 second. Niamh, so yes. Niamh's laughter broke the tension enough for Nomi to breathe. You re-famous here, Niamh said. That story improved breakfast for an entire week. Even Lucrezia smiled behind her glass. In a house ruled by secrets, Nomi's worst office mistake had somehow made her human. Niccolo arrived, charming, warm-eyed, and impossible not to like. He kissed his mother's cheek, greeted Vittorio, and looked at Nomi with open amusement. So this is the woman who made Sio speak in full sentences. Sio said nothing. Niccolo grinned. Miracle confirmed. For a few minutes, the room almost felt like a family dinner. Then Nomi noticed every door still had a guard. Niccolo was everything Sio refused to be in public, loose, easy, bright around the edges. Over dinner, he asked questions, teased his brother, and turned the table lighter without ever making it safe. Into the garden to breathe. The cold air hit her bare arms, but she stayed there staring at the dark lawn. Sio followed minutes later. He did not ask why she had left. He only removed his jacket and held it out. Nomi hesitated. I can survive cold weather. I know. Then why offer? Because surviving is not the same as being comfortable. She took the jacket. It smelled like him, cedar smoke, and the dangerous kind of warmth. In the garden, with the house glowing behind them, Nomi finally asked the question that had been sitting in her chest for weeks. Who was Leander? Sio's face closed. He died, that was my question. His hands tightened at his sides. For once, he looked less like a man in control, and more like someone holding a door shut from the other side. Nomi thought of the photo, LNS summer. 2 boys in the grass. Your brother, she said quietly. Sio turned toward her, and the silence between them changed. She did not press. She named the restaurant after him so he wouldn't disappear completely. For one brief second, all the armor left his face. Sio reached out and touched her jaw with a care that startled her more than force ever could. His thumb moved once along her skin, gentle, almost uncertain. Nomi stood still, afraid that even breathing would end the moment. Then his phone rang. The softness vanished. His eyes hardened. He stepped back and answered in Italian. The man in the garden was gone. Tommaso will take you home, he said. Sio, go. During the silent ride back, Tommaso kept his eyes on the road. After 20 minutes, he said, he does not speak of Leander. Nomi looked down at Sio's jacket around her shoulders and understood that he had given her more than warmth. He had let her touch a wound everyone else was forbidden to see. That should have felt like trust. Instead, it made the next lie feel inevitable. Men like Sio did not open doors without idols who could enter and who could never leave. After that night, the danger between them changed shape. It was no longer only attraction. It was knowledge. Sio had let her see grief he kept hidden from his own family, and Nomi knew better than to pretend that did not matter. A week later, he told her they would go to Montauk to translate documents away from the office. A beach house, she asked. A work location, with an ocean. Unfortunately, the drive took 3 hours. She worked on her laptop. He stared out the window. Neither of them mentioned the garden. Neither of them mentioned Leander. But inside her bag, Nomi carried copies of every article about Aldo Damiani, and the weight of them made lying beside Sio's silence feel dangerous. The car left the highway for a sandy coastal road, and the ocean appeared beyond the dunes. Sio finally spoke. My family has had this house for 40 years. From him, even that simple sentence felt like trust. The house itself was plain wood and salt-worn windows. Nothing like the marble empire in Manhattan. Inside it smelled of olive oil, rosemary, and clean sea air. Sio took off his jacket, rolled his sleeves, and began cooking without ceremony. Nomi watched him chop garlic with smooth, practiced movements. You cook, she asked. I eat. That is not the same thing. He glanced at her. For you, perhaps. It was the closest he had come to teasing her first. Nomi tried to help and burned the garlic in less than 2 minutes. Seo looked at the pan as if she had committed an act of war. You translate contracts in 3 languages, he said, but cannot tell when garlic is done. Garlic does not pay rent. His face shifted before he could stop it. A real smile, small but undeniable. For one night, the house almost convinced her that he could be simple, then his files proved otherwise. Later, they worked in the oceanfront room with contracts eyes spread across the table, and lamplight softening the hard lines of his face. The silence no longer felt hostile. It felt charged. When she looked up, he was watching her. 10 seconds passed, then 15. If you were going to keep looking at me like that, she said, at least blink. His answer was quiet. No. The distance between them was only 10 feet of floorboards, but it felt impossible to cross. Then a file slipped from Seo's stack and hit the floor near her chair. Nomi bent to pick it up and saw a name stamped on the corner, Damini, Aldo. Seo took the file from her hand before she could open it. Too fast, too controlled. That is not for translation. Nomi's pulse kicked. Then why is my father's name in your work papers? His face went blank. Because you are tired and seeing ghosts. The lie was so smooth it hurt more than the truth would have. Before she could demand more, his phone rang, and his voice turned cold. If he comes near the port again, handle it. The words landed hard. Handle it. No details. No mercy. Seo turned and saw Nomi standing there, the file no longer in her hand, but its name burned into her mind. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The same man who had cooked dinner smiled at burned garlic and looked at her like she was the only thing in the room could also give an order like that before midnight. On the drive back to Manhattan, Nomi pretended to sleep while her mind tore through every detail. The file, his hand taking it, the lie. At a gas station stop, she locked herself in the restroom and sent Neve the photo of the 2 boys. Is this Leander and Seo? Neve replied almost instantly. Yes. Seo was 7. Where did you get that? Nomi typed, did your family know Aldo Damiani? 3 dots appeared, vanished, then appeared again. Neve's answer was short. Ask Seo. Nomi stared at the screen until her hands went cold. Days later, a way out appeared in her inbox. An internship offer from Morrison & Reed, a corporate law firm with good pay, flexible hours, and insurance strong enough to help her mother. Elise had secretly sent her resume. The message under the offer read, someone has to think about your future while you busy moonlighting for the Mafia. Nomi stared at the email until the letters blurred. It was everything she needed. It was also a door away from Seo. That afternoon, she did not go straight back to her desk. She copied visitor logs from the archive cabinet, photographed 2 shipping invoices tied to Leander S., and hid the images in a folder named Tax Receipts. Then she overheard Raphael inside Seo's office. She needs to go before she finds the rest. Seo's voice was low. She stays. Then stop lying to yourself, Raphael said. You are not protecting her. You are containing her. Nomi backed away from the door, heart pounding. For the first time, someone had said the thing she had been afraid to name. The next morning, a brown envelope waited on her desk. No return address. Inside was a faded black and white photograph of her father, Aldo Damiani, standing outside Leander's restaurant. On the back, someone had written, ask your boss why he knew your father. This time, Nomi did not run blindly into Seo's office. First, she scanned the photo. Then she forwarded every file to Elise with one instruction. If I stop answering, open this. Only then did she walk through the double doors and slam the photo onto Seo's desk. That is my father in front of your restaurant, Nomi said. I want an explanation. Seo's face went still. Too still. Your father was a regular. Then why did you have a file with his name? Seo's silence was the answer she feared. Not a denial. Not the truth. Just a wall. Not have, he said. Nomi laughed once, sharp and bitter. That sounds more like a confession than a warning. She took both photographs and walked out before anger made her careless. 2 days later, the threat moved from secret to public. Tabloids posted photos of her beside Seo at Sivapriani, calling her the mystery woman with the new Don Marchetti. Her mother called in panic, voice shaking so badly Nomi could barely understand her. By evening, Nomi was back in Seo's office, slamming the door behind her. My mother saw the photos. Seo stood. Nomi, do not. I have a life outside this building, she said. I have school. I have a mother who cannot sleep when she is afraid. I have evidence I should not need, because the man I wanted to trust keeps lying to my face. Seo's armor cracked, but not enough. Delete the copies. Nomi went still. You searched my phone. I had to know what Gideon knew. No, you had to control what I knew. The room seemed to shrink around them. Sio looked guilty, angry, and cornered all at once. You do not understand what those files can do. Then tell me one true thing. Her voice shook. Not a command, not a warning. One truth, Sio, or I walk out and never come back. Sio looked at her as if the truth cost more than blood. I do not know how to stop looking at you, he said at last, and I hate that you make me weak enough to lie badly. The words were not sweet. That made them feel real. I do not know what to do with you. Known what to do with everything. Nomi should have stepped back. Instead, she crossed the distance and placed her hand on his chest. His heart was beating fast beneath her palm. She kissed him slowly, deliberately, with anger and 7 weeks of tension burning through her. Sio answered with fierce restraint, pulling her close but not trapping her. When they separated, she whispered, "This does not mean I forgive you." Sio nodded. "I know. And it does not mean I will stop digging. I would expect nothing less." That night, Nomi called Elise and declined the Morrison and Reed offer, but she did not tell Elise to delete the files. Elise was silent for 3 full seconds. "You are insane." "Probably. Does he at least kiss like a man worth ruining your life over?" "I am not answering that. You just did." Nomi laughed despite herself, but the laugh did not last. Next day, Elise called again, this time without teasing. A man in a gray coat had been waiting outside her office building. He had not approached. He had not threatened her. He had only stood there, watching, until she noticed. Nomi went cold. When she confronted Sio, he did not deny it. "She has your files. She is my friend. She is now involved. Because you made her involved." Sio's jaw tightened. "I told my people not to touch her." How generous. Nomi. "No, you do not get to put a man outside my best friend's job and call that protection." For the first time, Sio looked ashamed and still did not apologize fast enough. That was the worst part. He knew he had crossed a line, but some part of him still believed fear was a tool if it kept her alive. By the end of the week, Nomi found Sio alone in his office at dawn, sleeves rolled, knuckles bruised and bloody. Whatever protection he offered, she could no longer pretend it came clean. She stared at his hands. Those same hands had steadied her on a curb, touched her jaw in the garden, and held her like she might disappear. Now the skin was split across his knuckles. "Did you do that for me?" she asked. Sio did not lie, partly because he challenged you. His silence confirmed it. The answer should have sent her running. Instead, it made the room feel smaller and more honest than ever. Later that evening, Sio entered her apartment in Queens for the first time. He looked wrong there, too formal beside the second-hand couch. The chipped kitchen table, the stacks of law textbooks, and the family photos on the shelves. Without his marble walls, he seemed less untouchable but no less dangerous. Sio moved through her small living room with unexpected care, as if afraid to disturb anything that mattered to her. He touched the spine of her civil code textbook, pulled it free, and opened to a random page. Then he began reading the dry legal language aloud in Italian, turning the stiff words into something almost musical. Nomi burst out laughing, not politely, not nervously, mid-sentence, and looked at her like he had found something rare. "Do that again," he said. "Laugh on command." "Absolutely not, please." The word was quiet enough to undo her. In that room, with the book open in his hands and the hidden files still sitting in Elise's inbox, Nomi realized the truth she had been dodging. She loved him, but she still did not trust him. That contradiction should have made her leave. Instead, it made her understand exactly how dangerous love could become when it grew inside a lie. She had not fallen for the man who made rooms lower their voices. She had fallen for the man who cooked from memory, kept his brother's photograph like a wound, and read law as if it deserved tenderness. But love did not erase the file with her father's name, the man outside Elise's office, or the blood on his knuckles. When they kissed in her living room, there was no accident left in it. Nomi chose him with her eyes open, not because he was safe, but because she was tired of pretending safety had ever been simple. Sio held her carefully, his strength never careless. Their teasing faded into silence, then into something deeper. The worn apartment around them felt newly dangerous, because he was finally inside it. He guided her toward the bedroom, with a hand at the base of her spine, then stopped at the doorway and waited. "You re-asking permission now," she said softly. "I should have asked more often." The honesty in that answer caught her off guard. When he touched the edge of her shirt, his gaze stayed on her face, not her body. "May I?" he asked. Nomi nodded, then answered properly. "Yes." The word felt small in the room, but it changed everything. With her consent, the last careful distance between them fell away. When Sio's shirt came off, his tattoos were fully visible, saints, thorns, old prayers, and scars hidden between them. Nomi traced the dark lines above his ribs, and a tremor moved through him. This man, who could silence a room with one look, shook beneath the light touch of her fingers. He was attentive in a way that made her feel seen instead of taken. There was no need for performance, no need for fear disguised as control. For one night, both of them let the armor fall and stayed. Inside the quiet walls of her mother's apartment, Sio Marchetti was not a rumor, not a title, not a threat moving through marble halls. He was a man with his forehead resting against hers, breath uneven, control trembling at the edges because he was using it for her, not against her. Nomi saw the difference clearly. The jacket in the garden, the space he kept in the car, the hand that stopped short of touching her. All of it had been restraint, trying to survive desire. But restraint was not the same as honesty. She held his face and made him meet her eyes. "More lies about my father," she whispered. Sio closed his eyes. "I will try." It was not enough. It was the first crack. Afterward, the room was still. Sio stayed close, his hand wrapped around hers, thumb moving slowly over her knuckles as if grounding them both. Nomi did not feel conquered. She felt awake. The choice had been hers, from the first step to the last. And that mattered more than she could explain. By morning, he was gone. For one sharp second, panic rose in her throat. Then she smelled coffee. On the kitchen table sat a double espresso in her mother's, only unchipped blue mug. Beside it lay a napkin folded with almost military precision. No note, no speech. Just proof that he had stood in her tiny kitchen at dawn and tried to leave something gentle behind. The image of Sio fighting her old coffee machine at 6 in the morning should have been funny. Instead, it nearly broke her. Beside the espresso lay the stolen photograph of the two boys, the one she had taken from his file weeks ago. He knew. He had always known. On the back in his slanted handwriting was one word: stay. Beneath the photo sat something else, a torn corner from an old shipping ledger, dated the week her father died. Aldo Damiani's name appeared beside Leander S. and one handwritten note paid in full. Nomi touched the paper with cold fingers. Sio had not given her the truth. He had given her just enough to keep her from leaving. That realization changed everything. Nomi chose to stay, but not as the woman waiting to be told. She stayed as a law student with a scanner app, a best friend holding backup files, and a reason to memorize every name that passed through Sio's office. For 43 days, she loved Sio, watched him, questioned him, and quietly built a second file of her own. She learned that Marchetti freight moved through 3 ports under 4 shell companies. She learned Leander S. had been purchased 2 weeks after her father's death. She learned Aldo Damiani had not simply died. He had disappeared from every official record at the same time. Sio knew she was watching. Nomi knew he knew. Their days became a careful war wrapped inside tenderness. He brought her coffee and removed names from documents before they reached her desk. She smiled, thanked him, and recovered older copies from the archive. He sent Tommaso to drive her home. She used the ride to study which routes they avoided. He kissed her in the dark like a man, trying to confess with his mouth what he still could not say aloud. She kissed him back and kept a recorder hidden beneath a scarf when Raphael spoke too freely outside the conference room. The more she discovered, the less simple her anger became. Sio had lied. Sio had protected her. Sio had controlled her. Sio had also, in ways he did not know how to say, loved her. But love did not erase a body. Love did not clear a ledger. Love did not explain why Aldo Damiani had vanished. The next clue came from Elise. "Your father's name appears in one civil filing," she said over the phone. It was sealed, but the index survived. "Who filed it?" Nomi asked. Elise hesitated. "Your mother." The room tilted. Nomi looked toward the hallway, where her mother was sleeping, and felt the past open beneath her feet. The filing had been dismissed within 48 hours. No hearing, no explanation. The attorney of record had later joined a firm that handled Marchetti import contracts. Nomi copied the case number 3 times, afraid it might vanish if she looked away. That night, Sio came to her apartment with groceries and a guarded softness in his eyes. She almost asked him everything. Instead, she let him cook, watched his hands handle garlic, tomatoes, salt, and knives with the same calm precision, and wondered how many versions of him were true. The man who fed her, the man who lied to her, the man who might know where her father was buried. A week later, the threat finally found Elise. Her laptop was stolen from her office bag during lunch. Nothing else was taken. Not her wallet, not her phone, just the laptop holding Nomi's backup files. Elise called with her voice thin and furious. "Tell me your boyfriend did not do this." Nomi did not answer, because the worst part was that she did not know. When she confronted Sio, he went very still. "I did not order that." "That is not the same as saying, your people did not do it." His silence returned, heavy and familiar. "I will find out." "No," Nomi said, moved behind his eyes. "You do not understand the kind of people you are provoking." "I am starting to understand exactly that. For the first time, Seo looked not angry but afraid, not for himself, for what she was becoming. That fear only made her more certain she was close. The stolen laptop forced Nomi to move faster. She printed the most important documents and hid one set behind her mother's medication cabinet, one beneath a loose floorboard in her bedroom, and one inside an evidence locker at school under a friend's clinic access. She stopped keeping everything digital. She stopped assuming Seo could not reach her. At the office, she watched him watch her. Their conversations grew sharper. "You are tired," he said one evening. "I am informed," she answered. "Those are not the same." "No, but one often causes the other." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "There are doors you cannot close once opened." Nomi held his gaze. "My father opened one, didn't he?" Co's expression hardened. "Do not ask me that here." "Then where?" His jaw worked. "Somewhere I can keep you alive after I answer." It was the closest he had come to admitting the truth had teeth. That night, Seo took her back to Leander's after closing. The dining room was dark, except for one light over the bar. Without customers, without waiters, without the smell of bread covering the walls, the restaurant felt like a stage after the play had ended. Seo led her to the private room and opened a safe behind a framed photograph of his brother. Inside were ledgers, old passports, stacks of cash, and one sealed envelope marked AD. Nomi's breath caught. "Why do you have that?" Seo did not touch it. "Because my father kept everything. And you kept it after him. Some things are not safe to destroy, or too useful to lose." The accusation hit. Seo accepted it. "Yes." Nomi reached for the envelope, but he caught her wrist. "Not hard enough. If you open that, people will die." Nomi looked at his hand on her wrist. "People already did." Seo released her as if burned. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the old refrigerator beyond the wall. "Your father worked with Leander," Sue said. "Not for us. With him. They were moving evidence, not product." Nomi's throat tightened. "Evidence of what?" Seo's eyes moved toward the photograph of his brother. "My father's port operation. Judges. Police. Shipments. Names that would have taken down half the city. And Aldo. He was supposed to testify." The words struck harder than any shout. Nomi stepped back. "My mother said he got sick. Your mother was trying to keep you alive." Nomi stared at him. "Who killed him?" Seo's silence broke something in the room. "I was 17, he said. "I did not give the order." "That is not what I asked." He looked at her then, and the answer was already there. Vittorio, his father, the man at the head of the table. Nomi's sneeze nearly failed. Seo moved as if to help her, but she raised one hand and stopped him. "Do not touch me." He obeyed. That obedience hurt almost as much as the truth. "You knew," she whispered. "Not at first, but later." His silence answered. "How long, Seo?" His face looked carved from stone. "Before I hired you." Nomi laughed once, broken and disbelieving. "You hired me because of my name. I hired you because Raphael flagged the application. And then I kept you close because other people saw what I saw. A weapon. A target." "Do not make that sound noble." His control cracked. "It was never only strategy, but it was strategy." He closed his eyes. Yes, that single word did more damage than any lie. It made every coffee, every touch, every moment of protection bend under a second meaning. He had wanted her. He had guarded her. He had also managed her like a threat. Nomi left Leander's with the envelope in her coat, and Seo's warning burning behind her. Not go home. She went to Elise. Together, they opened the envelope on the floor of Elise's apartment, surrounded by takeout boxes and fear. Inside were copies of port records, names of officials, one photograph of Aldo with Leander Marchetti, and a handwritten statement signed by Aldo Damiani, 2 days before his disappearance. Nomi read it once, then again. Her father had known he might die. He had written that if anything happened to him, the evidence should go to federal prosecutors. It never had. The bottom of the last page was one more name circled in red. Ottavio Marchetti. Not Vittorio, not Seo. Ottavio. The uncle who had been in Sicily for years. The man no one mentioned unless they had to. Elise looked at Nomi. "This is not just about your father." Nomi folded the page carefully. "No, it's about who controls the family now." For 2 days, Nomi avoided Seo. She ignored his calls, refused Tommaso at the curb, and slept at Elise's apartment with a chair under the door. On the 3rd night, Seo appeared alone in the hallway. No guards, no driver, no armor except the kind he carried in his bones. "Ottavio is back," he said before she could close the door. "Then you should be busy. He knows you have something." Nomi's hand tightened around the chain lock. "Did you tell him?" Seo flinched. "No, do you expect me to believe you?" "No." That honesty stopped her. He looked exhausted, almost stripped bare. "I expect you to stay alive long enough to hate me properly." Nomi wanted to slam the door. Instead, She asked the question that mattered. Did Ottavio kill my father? Sio's answer came without hesitation. Yes. Then after a beat, and my brother died because he tried to stop him. The floor seemed to tilt beneath both of them. Leander had not died in some vague family tragedy. He had tried to help Aldo move the evidence out of the port, and Ottavio had made both men disappear. Vittorio had buried the scandal to protect the dynasty. Sio had inherited the silence and wore it like a crown made of wire. Nomi let Sio inside because the hallway suddenly felt too exposed. He told her what he had never told anyone, that he had been 7 in the photograph. 17 when he learned the truth, and too young then to stop the men who controlled the family. Later he became powerful enough to punish almost anyone, but by then the evidence was gone, witnesses were dead, and Ottavio had vanished to Sicily. Why not tell me? Nomi asked. Sio looked at the floor. Because if you knew everything, you would leave, and if I didn't know, you might survive. She shook her head. That was never your choice to make. Nomi chose to return to the Todd Hill mansion, but not as the woman waiting to be told. She went with copies hidden in 3 places, Elise ready to send the files, and Sio walking beside her like a man approaching his own execution. Dinner had barely begun when Ottavio entered from Sicily with a lazy smile that made every conversation stop. He looked older than the photographs, but his eyes were bright with cruelty. He noticed Nomi, then Sio, and laughed. Damiani, he said loudly. That is a funny name to keep so close, nephew, especially after what happened to Aldo. The room froze. Neve stopped smiling. Lucrezia set down her glass. Vittorio watched Nomi as if waiting for history to repeat itself. Sio did not move. His voice dropped to something lethal. Choose your next word carefully. Ottavio smiled wider. Why? Afraid she will learn you kept her in your bed and in your cage. Nomi stood before Sio could answer. In that silence, every romantic illusion collapsed. Aldo Damiani, her father, Leander Marchetti, the port, the ledger, the family that had buried 2 men and called it survival. Nomi looked at Sio and finally saw the full shape of the cage around her. She had never been only his secretary, never only the woman he wanted. She was living proof of an old crime tied to the Marchetti family. Sio had kept her close because he loved her. Yes, but also because her existence could destroy him. Near him she was protected. Near him she was contained. But this time, Nomi did not wait for any man at that table to decide what truth was worth. She placed her phone on the white cloth, screen glowing with a scheduled email ready to send. One word for me, she said, looking straight at Ottavio, then Vittorio, then Seo, and your whole empire burns. Every Mafia boss story is not only about power, money, revenge, or fear. Beneath the violence and darkness, there is often a painful human lesson about choices, consequences, loyalty, family, and the price of ambition. This story reminds us that no matter how powerful a person becomes, no one can escape the truth forever. Hundreds of people, and make others tremble at the sound of his name. But if his heart is empty, his victory is never complete. The Mafia boss in this story represents a man who built his life on control. He believed that fear was stronger than love, that silence was safer than honesty, and that power could protect him from pain. For years, he may have won every battle in the streets, in business, and among his enemies. But the most important battle was never outside him. It was inside his own heart. That is where he truly lost himself. One of the most meaningful lessons from this story is that power without morality becomes a prison. Many people dream of becoming rich, respected, or feared. They think success means having control over others. But real success is not measured by how many people obey you. It is measured by how many lives you protect, how much peace you create, and how much good remains after you are gone. The Mafia boss had money, influence, and protection, but he did not have peace. His life shows us that a person can be surrounded by luxury and still feel completely alone. Another important lesson is that loyalty is valuable, but blind loyalty can destroy lives. In the world of crime, loyalty is often treated like the highest law. People are expected to follow orders without question. Never mean giving up your conscience. A loyal person does not simply protect someone else's secrets. A loyal person also has the courage to stop someone from destroying themselves. This story teaches us that loyalty without honesty is dangerous. Real loyalty should be connected to truth, respect, and moral responsibility. The story also shows the heavy cost of revenge. Revenge often feels powerful in the beginning. It gives a person the illusion that pain can be answered with pain. But revenge rarely heals anything. Instead, it creates a chain of suffering that keeps growing. One act of revenge leads to another. One betrayal leads to another. In the end, everyone loses something. The Mafia boss may have believed that revenge would restore his honor, but what it truly did was steal his humanity piece by piece. This is a powerful reminder that forgiveness is not weakness. Sometimes, Forgiveness is the strongest decision a person can make because it breaks the cycle of hatred. Family is another central lesson in this kind of story. Many mafia bosses claim they do everything for family. They say they commit crimes to protect the people they love. But protection without honesty can become another form of harm. A family does not only need money or security. A family needs trust, emotional safety, and love that is not poisoned by fear. If a father, husband, brother, or son becomes powerful but loses the ability to show tenderness, then his family may live in a beautiful house, but still feel trapped inside it. This story reminds us that children and loved ones often pay the price for the choices of powerful men. The mafia boss may think his decisions only affect his enemies, but every secret, every violent act, and every betrayal leaves a shadow over the innocent people around him. That is why one of the strongest educational messages is this: before making a decision, we must ask ourselves who will suffer because of it. A selfish choice may bring temporary success, but it can create long-term pain for the people we love most. Another meaningful point is the danger of pride. Pride can make a person refuse to apologize, refuse to change, and refuse to admit they are wrong. The mafia boss may have spent years believing that saying sorry would make him look weak, but in reality, the ability to apologize is a sign of strength. It takes courage to face the damage we have caused. It takes maturity to admit that we hurt someone, and it takes true character to change before it is too late. The story also teaches that redemption is possible, but it always requires sacrifice. A person cannot simply say they have changed. They must prove it through action. Redemption means accepting responsibility, protecting the innocent, telling the truth, and sometimes losing everything that was built on lies. For a mafia boss, redemption may mean walking away from power, exposing corruption, saving someone he once endangered, or choosing love over control. The path to redemption is painful, because it forces a person to confront the worst parts of themselves. But it is also the only path that can lead to peace. From a human perspective, this story is powerful because it shows that even the hardest heart can still feel pain. Behind the cold eyes of a mafia boss, there may be regret, loneliness, childhood wounds, or a deep fear of being betrayed. This does not excuse his actions, but it helps us understand that broken people often break others when they never learn how to heal. The educational value here is important. Pain should not become an excuse to hurt people. Instead, pain should become a reason to grow, to seek wisdom, and to choose a better path. For viewers, the lesson is not to admire the criminal lifestyle, but to understand its emptiness. The suits, cars, mansions, and power may look attractive from the outside, but behind them there is often fear, guilt, and loss. A life built on violence can never bring true happiness. A life built on lies can never bring true freedom. And a life built on fear can never create real love. In the end, the story of a mafia boss is really a warning. It warns us that every choice has a consequence. It warns us that money cannot buy peace. It warns us that fear cannot replace respect. It warns us that revenge cannot heal a wounded heart. Most importantly, it reminds us that the greatest power a person can have is not the power to control others, but the power to control themselves. The deepest lesson is simple but meaningful. Choose character over pride, love over control, truth over silence, and forgiveness over revenge. No matter how dark a person's past may be, change is possible when they are willing to face the truth. But the longer someone waits, the higher the price becomes. A mafia boss may win the streets, defeat his enemies, and build an empire, but if he loses his soul, he has lost everything. True strength is not found in violence. True strength is found in responsibility, compassion, humility, and the courage to become better before it is too late.